Mass layoffs and company closures in the European Union and neighboring countries. Just a few examples. The closure of companies in Spain exceeds 46,000 in the first 8 months of the year. In the third quarter of the year, more than 13,000 companies have ceased their activity. The sectors most affected by the closures in the first 8 months of the year are commerce, 8,636, construction, 6,506 companies, professional activities, 4,897, and the real estate sector, 4,818. In order to make more accurate decisions adapted to a new economic situation, companies need technological tools that allow them to minimize risk and survive in the medium-long term. With this objective, Experian has the Delphis for Business Next Gen scores, a new range of scores, among which are the Delphis for individuals, the self-employed and the insurance sector, which added to that for companies, make this solution the most accurate for the evaluation of the credit quality of the Spanish business fabric. According to data from Experian, a technology company specializing in credit services, decision software and advanced analytics, there are already more than 46,000 companies that have closed in Spain during the first 8 months of 2022, especially SMEs and micro SMEs, which make up the vast majority of the Spanish business fabric. Until August, more than 46,000 companies in Spain have closed. Madrid, the 30th of September 2022. This can be seen in the data that Experian has published on Spanish companies. Specifically, as of August 2022, more than 46,000 companies had closed, most of them SMEs and micro SMEs. Most of the company closures have occurred in Madrid, where data indicates that 12,832 companies have closed in the first 8 months of the year. It is followed by Catalonia, where there have been 6,775 company closures, and Valencia, with 5,499. Despite these data, during this period Aragon and Navarra have stood out, where there has been a notable increase in the closure of companies. For example, in Aragon closures have increased by 16.70%, while in Navarra, by 15.77% compared to the same period of the previous year. The main causes of the crisis that many companies have suffered are the economic slowdown, the end of the bankruptcy moratorium, inflation and the energy and raw materials crisis. All of them have had a direct consequence on the increase in the rate of non-payments and delinquencies in Spain. Every day 110 companies close in Spain. Late payment puts more than 170,000 companies on the brink of closure. 60% have already verified a negative effect on their accounts and almost 30% register an increase in their financial costs. Madrid created November 14, 2022. Last update November 14, 2022. Inflation, skyrocketing costs, distribution bottlenecks, rising interest rates and the slowdown in the economy are tangible risks that will trigger bankruptcies and business closures. There is even already a specific figure on its impact. 171,000 companies acknowledge that they could close due to the impact of delinquency, around 12% of the total or 3 points more than last year, according to the latest credit risk management report. In Spain, published by Crédito y Caution and Iberinform, according to this study, late payment is a real concern for more than half of Spanish companies. Thus, 60% have already verified a negative effect on their accounts, 6 points more than in the previous report, while 48% face significant income losses. The worsening of the effects of late payment reaches higher levels in the aspects of business activity most affected by the increase in interest rates, since 29% of the business fabric registers an increase in their financial costs, 8 points more than in 2021. Likewise, 18% of companies are forced to stop their business expansion for this reason, 5 points more than last year, and 15% have to limit their new investments, which is 4 more points. The crisis of the pandemic and the war will result in 300,000 company closures in 2022. The so-called zombie companies, those that, for 2 years, do not generate enough profits to pay off their debts. They keep going thanks to aid, to refinancing, which the Bank of Spain already estimated at 220,000 a year ago, will fall due to the crisis of prices, supplies and the hardening of the situation. Spain faces the closure of 300,000 companies this year, according to data from administrative managers based on their daily operations throughout the territory. As the managers communicate to the objective, who on a day-to-day basis carry the documentation, declarations, and papers of the SMEs, 95% of the Spanish productive fabric. This newspaper has already advanced the business drift that it expected. The dean of the Madrid Bar Association, ICAM, José María Alonso, in an event held at the Palacio de las Comunicaciones in Madrid attended by the Objective, estimated the imminent bankruptcies that before the war in Ukraine were discounted. President Pedro Sánchez and the economic vice president Nadia Calviño. Thousands of companies will close in Europe. Friday, September 30, 2022. Energy prices represent an imminent risk of loss of productivity and the closure of thousands of European companies, for which reason solving this crisis is a matter of survival, warned the largest business group in the European Union, EU. Business Europe. In a letter to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, the group estimated that 70% of Europe's fertilizer production has been shut down or slowed down, while 50% of aluminum capacity has been lost. There is a real danger that companies, especially energy-intensive industries, will move out of Europe permanently, which will drastically increase our dependence on third countries, the entity said. Such a scenario will lead to a loss of competitiveness and jobs, he said. The closure of car factories in Europe leaves more than 1 million people temporarily unemployed. The Paris Motor Show will not be held this year due to the coronavirus. Vehicle production in Spain will fall by 60% in March. In Spain, it has affected 60,000 people and has so far resulted in a loss of production valued at 237,806 vehicles. The closure of the factories undertaken by the main vehicle manufacturers around the world, as a consequence of the coronavirus crisis, has affected a total of 1,087 million workers in Europe, who have been temporarily without activity. This is clear from the figures published this Monday by the Association of European Automobile Manufacturers, ACEA, which also include a reduction in production that affects 1,198 million motor vehicles. The impact on employment refers to the 27 member states of the European Union, as well as the United Kingdom, out of a total of 2.6 million workers employed by the industry on the continent, which represents an impact of more than 40% of the total. Spain. In the case of Spain, the number of workers affected amounts to 60,000 people and a loss of production valued at 237,806 vehicles. Germany, for its part, is the main affected country, with more than 568,000 affected workers and a production volume of 359,287 units. The total figure for the loss in the manufacture of vehicles includes passenger cars, trucks, vans, buses and coaches, with a stoppage of activity that is having an average duration of 15 days, although these figures are provisional, since the prolongation of the government-approved limitations will continue to affect European vehicle production. ACEA has obtained these figures through a weekly update of multiple data, including IHS Markit, Mark Lines, and from national auto manufacturer associations and market announcements made by the companies. Unemployment. More significant data. Countries. Spain 32.3% plus. Germany 5.8% plus. United Kingdom 10.5% plus. France 18.2% plus. In the first quarter of 2008, unemployment in Europe was 6.8%. At the end of last year it was at 11.5%. This percentage was distributed unequally according to countries and ages, producing the highest concentration of unemployed among the youngest, whose unemployment rates reached more than intolerable limits in some countries, being a source of social inequality and political instability. It must be taken into account that the situation of unemployment or job insecurity not only affects income but also causes other damage such as low self-esteem. The unemployed tend to blame themselves even if their problem is not individual but rather collective and general, but it is difficult to explain when one suffers from the situation of unemployment that the same happens to others. Here, in all fairness, that evil of many does not work. But also the unemployed, especially when it is long-term, tends to perceive themselves as socially excluded and see how their status is lowered by not being able to do things, access a certain level of consumption, leisure, coverage of basic needs, that you could access before. In addition, the long-term unemployed tend to lose their qualifications, and this will make it even more difficult for them to find work in the future, with the loss of the training efforts they made in the past. Inequality between countries. In Europe, the situation is not the same in all countries. According to a study by the Bertelsmann Foundation, Austria, Denmark, Germany, Sweden and Finland offer the best parameters for access to the labor market. Spain continues with the worst unemployment record in Europe. X-ray of unemployment in Spain. Unemployment in Spain continues to be a pending issue for many years. A structural problem that, despite the continuous periods of recovery, cannot come close to the European average, and that weighs down, of course, the growth of our country. Currently, the number of unemployed is below 3 million, records that have not been reached since 2008. Unemployment in Spain continues to be a pending issue for many years. A structural problem that, despite the continuous periods of recovery, cannot come close to the European average, and that weighs down, of course, the growth of our country. Currently, the number of unemployed is below 3 million, records that have not been reached since 2008. Despite the good news, the total number of unemployed continues to be very high, and the slow decline in this group suggests that there are serious structural problems that prevent this group from reducing its volume to a greater extent. For this reason, the unemployment rate continues to be above 10%, going back to 2008 to have reference rates below it. Specifically, Spain has an unemployment rate of 12.5%, being the EU country with the highest unemployment rate, surely very close to structural unemployment. Layoffs from tech companies in Europe. The list. Layoffs from tech companies have hit Europe. Several of Europe's best-known startups have made drastic cuts in their teams to cut costs and preserve their cash flow as the global economy hits a recession. Tech stocks have tumbled on public markets, and valuations of private companies have taken a hit as a result. Investors are writing checks more cautiously, while urging their portfolio companies to hold on to cash. Consumers are also starting to watch their pennies, which puts business-to-consumer startups in an especially difficult position. That means it's an unfortunate time to raise funds, and particularly a bad time if you're a large company with a large monthly consumption rate. The tech layoffs began with companies including fintech giant Klarna, speedy grocery store poster child Gorillas, online event platform Hopin and digital health company Cry. Since then, they have spread rapidly to all sectors. Here, we're listing layoffs we're aware of, and we hope this helps hiring managers at other startups know where to look for new talent. Layoffs at tech companies. European startups letting their employees go. November 2022. SAS. MessageBird, the Dutch communications platform, laid off around 31% of employees. He attributed the cuts to the team growing too quickly and not integrating acquisitions efficiently enough. Financial technology. Playo, which provides expense management and company cards for business expenses, is putting 15% of its workforce at risk of layoff, which is up to 150 jobs. Its CEO and co-founder, Jeppe Rindom, announced the cuts in a LinkedIn post, saying they came after the company laid out its strategy for the coming year. Wayflyer, which provides financing for e-commerce companies and achieved unicorn status earlier this year, laid off 40% of its global workforce. Around 200 jobs will be affected, including 70 at the Irish startup's Dublin headquarters. The founders said the cuts are due to the company scaling too quickly in the last 15 months. Weather. Planetly, a Berlin-based carbon accounting startup, was shut down by its US-based acquirers, letting all 200 employees go. The company was acquired by software company OneTrust last year. Infarm, a German vertical farming company, laid off up to 50% of its workforce. He said that after the cuts, He expects to become financially self-sufficient within 18 months. It comes after the company let 50 employees back in September. Mobility. Dance, a Berlin-based electric bike subscription service, laid off 16% of its workforce. Founder Eric Quidinas-Walfors shared the news in a LinkedIn post after briefing employees, saying the decision was made in light of the company's cost-conscious approach to the future. October 2022. Mobility. Electric vehicle startup Arrival has announced a restructuring to focus more on the US market, putting hundreds of UK employees at risk of being laid off as a result. It came after the company laid off 800 people in July and then let go of 35 people at its Charlotte, US, office in August, representing about 38% of the region's workforce. Health tech. Cry, the digital health provider, announced it was letting go of 10% of its workforce of about 3,000 people. In May earlier this year, the company also laid off 100 employees. September 2022. Consumer. Cazoo, the online used car retailer, cut its headcount by 15% in June, affecting around 750 jobs. It also froze hiring for non-essential roles, according to an investor presentation seen by Visite. Earlier this month, it moved out of the European Union, bringing the total number of people made redundant in 2022 to 1,500. Furniture retailer Made.com has gone on sale and is looking to lay off 35% of its workforce by the end of October. More than 200 jobs could be affected. The company cited factors such as a decline in consumer buying of furniture and supply chain instability, leading to the need to cut back and potentially sell. Financial technology. Klarna, the buy now pay later giant, planned to lay off 10% of its global workforce in May. Most of the affected roles were in Stockholm, the Sifted analysis showed, while when it came to departments, talent acquisition and engineering teams were the most affected. This month, they announced a second round of planned cuts, telling Sifted that fewer than 100 employees would be affected globally. Juni, the Swedish neobank for e-commerce, laid off around 10% of its employees at the end of September, just 3 months after raising a $206 million Series B. Our workforce has grown exponentially this year, and due to a shift in business priorities coupled with the current economic climate, we have made the difficult decision to make some internal roles redundant, a spokesperson told Sifted, adding that the company is providing compensation packages to employees who are laid off. In November, the fintech co-founders announced that they are increasing layoffs at the company to a third of the entire workforce. Our decision to reassess our organizational structure and operating model is proactive and ensures that we are better positioned to face whatever challenges this broader macroeconomic context may bring in the future, co-founders Samir El-Sabini and Anders Orsedal wrote in a statement. Post on LinkedIn. Our strategic goals remain unchanged. SaaS. Pitch. The Berlin-based startup that creates Google Slides and PowerPoint alternatives, announced it was laying off 30% of its staff, affecting 59 employees. The company said it would pay the salaries of laid-off employees until the end of 2022. Their shares would also continue to vest until the end of 2022, and they could keep them after layoff. August 2022. Financial technology. Clearco, the Canada-based and best-funded revenue-based finance startup active in Europe, has laid off 25% of its global staff, its founders announced in a memo on LinkedIn. They also said the company would seek strategic options for its international operations. It came after the company laid off 10% of its staff at its EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa, hub in Dublin in June. Health tech. Babylon, the UK health tech app that provides easy access to GPs, physiotherapists, nurses and pharmacists, planned to cut 100 jobs in its global workforce. The layoffs came as the company planned to cut costs by up to $100 million during the third quarter of 2022. July 2022. Consumer. SellerX, a Berlin-based Amazon aggregator, cut 28 jobs. Financial technology. Zego, a commercial auto insurance provider, announced that it would lay off 17% of its staff. SaaS. Hopin, the once highly valued online event platform, laid off 138 employees in February, 12% of its workforce. The company laid off 29% more of its workforce in July, which totals 242 people. And in November, it laid off another 17% of the staff in a third round of layoffs. June 2022. Consumer. Getir, the granddaddy of the express grocery delivery industry, cut around 14% of its staff globally, around 4,500 positions. Financial technology. Nuri, the Berlin-based digital bank, announced that it would lay off part of its team. The company told Sifted that 45 employees would be affected, which is equivalent to 20% of its workforce. Chief Executive Officer Christina Walker-Mayer said in a blog post that the company needed to shift our strategic plans towards earlier profitability to adapt to the new reality in financial markets. The company then filed for bankruptcy in August. Freetrade, the London-based trading platform, laid off 15% of its staff. Its chief executive, Adam Dodds, told staff about the plans at a general meeting. The company told Sifted that employees were offered the opportunity to take a voluntary layoff, in an attempt to reduce the number of mandatory layoffs that may be necessary. Curve, the London-based digital wallet aggregator, laid off between 60 and 70 people, but did not disclose what percentage of its employees this was. According to data from LinkedIn, Curve's workforce was 425 people, which means that it could represent up to 10% of its workforce. CEO Shachar Bialik told Sifted that the company made the decision to cut roles, with the goal of putting ourselves in the best possible position to grow in the second half of the year. Cryptocurrency trading platform Bitpanda laid off around a third of its staff as it looked to broaden the runway to weather the crypto winter. The company said it reduced its headcount to a target of 730 people. Sifted understood its headcount to be 1,100, meaning the layoffs accounted for 34% of staff. Bitpanda's 3 co-founders told employees, "We need to make fundamental changes to the way we operate and sharpen our focus by going back to basics, prioritizing security and compliance, user experience, education and community, while we deprioritize everything else." Mobility. Voi, the scooter startup, laid off 10% of the employees at its headquarters in Stockholm, about 35 people. May 2022. Consumer. Zap, the fast grocery delivery company, told staff in an email seen by Sifted that 10% of its team faced redundancy. The email cited rising inflation, the war in Ukraine and supply chain disruption as factors behind the layoffs. Zap confirmed the situation to Sifted. Gorillas, the express grocery delivery startup, laid off about 300 employees from its Berlin headquarters. Financial technology. Uncapped, the revenue-based funding startup, laid off 29 of its staff, 26% of its total headcount. Most of the cut positions were product engineers, the company told Sifted. Layoffs. Europe Inc. cuts jobs as economy falters. File photo. Commuters cross London Bridge into the financial district, in London, Britain, September 26, 2022. Reuters, Peter Nichols, file photo, Reuters. Reuters. Many companies announced layoffs to control costs. Compiled by Agata Rybska and Louise Bruce Rasmussen, Reuters News. November 22, 2022. Economy Europe jobs. Decades of high inflation and the impact of the war in Ukraine have pressured companies across Europe to consider laying off staff or freezing hiring. Below are some of the companies that have announced layoffs to control costs. Air France. France's flagship airline was in talks to shed nearly 300 ground staff positions through voluntary layoffs, Le Figaro newspaper reported in June. Alfa Laval. The Swedish engineering group launched a restructuring campaign at its power and marine units affecting some 500 employees, including the effect of the liquidation of Russian operations, after the weak tanker market and high costs hit business. Maritime. BASF. The German chemical maker announced a new savings program that will include an undisclosed amount of job cuts, later saying its European operations had to be cut permanently. Finnair. The Finnish airline will cut some 150 jobs, of which 90 are in its home country, as part of a plan to return to profitability. Getir, the Turkish express grocery delivery company, plans to cut 14% of its staff globally due to rising inflation and costs, a source with knowledge of the matter told Reuters. Henkel, Germany's Henkel, the company behind Schwarzkopf, will cut about 2,000 positions due to low demand for its products, as well as rising costs and global supply chain issues. Husqvarna, the maker of garden tools and equipment, will cut 1,000 jobs, the vast majority of them related to switching from gasoline-powered tools to batteries. The news came after the company reported weaker than expected third-quarter results. Klarna, the Swedish payments company, is cutting 10% of its 7,000-strong workforce after rampant inflation and the war in Ukraine hit business confidence. Mount dei Paschi of Siena, the Italian state bank, has agreed with the unions to cut 4,125 employees, out of a total of 21,015, by the end of the year through a costly voluntary early retirement plan. Felipe, the Dutch medical equipment maker, will cut around 4,000 jobs, or 5% of its workforce, to offset falling sales and following a mass recall of its breathing machines. SalMar, the Norwegian fish farmer, announced the temporary layoff of 851 employees as the Norwegian government plans to raise taxes on salmon farms to help fight inflation. Siemens Gamesa, the Spanish wind turbine manufacturer, plans to cut 2,900 jobs, most in Europe, as part of a plan to return to profitability. Sync, the Swedish cloud communications company, will lay off 150 employees, almost 4% of its workforce, as it targets gross savings of at least 300 million Swedish kronor per year. Stellantis, the world's fourth-largest automaker, has laid off an unspecified number of workers at its Michigan stamping plant indefinitely to mitigate the impacts of supply chain woes. Valmet began negotiations in May for temporary layoffs at its valve factory in Helsinki for up to 3 months, affecting some 340 employees, due to reduced orders caused by the war and China's COVID-19 restrictions. Source: regulatory documents, Reuters stories and company websites, collected by Agata Rybska and Louise Bruce Rasmussen in Gdańsk, edited by Mila Nisi. Thousands march as Greeks strike over suffocating inflation. Athens, November 9. Reuters. Greek workers launched a one-day strike on Wednesday, demanding higher wages to cope with rising inflation, as energy prices and the cost of living in Europe soar and trigger action. Industrialists and protests throughout the continent. In Athens, thousands of people marched in the second 24-hour strike this year over rising inflation, some carrying banners reading, "No layoffs, no pay cuts." Brief clashes broke out outside Parliament between protesters throwing Molotov cocktails and riot police firing tear gas. It is the latest labor action in Europe, where a growing cost of living crisis and rising energy prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine have sparked strikes this month in Britain, France, Spain and Germany, the world's largest economy. Large in the region. We can no longer bear the high costs. We can no longer bear the poverty. We can no longer bear the exhaustion, said Georgos Palioris, a retiree who joined the march. The General Confederation of Greek Workers, GSEE, which represents workers in the private sector, said the unions called the strike in protest against the inflation that is suffocating Greek households, the jungle conditions in the labor market, referring to labor laws. Ferries were idle in ports and work stoppages by public transport staff caused chaos in traffic in the capital. Some flights were grounded because air traffic controllers had said they planned to join the strike for 6 hours. GSEE, together with public sector umbrella union ADEDY, are demanding an increase in the minimum wage, now at around €713, $717 per month, and the restoration of collective labor law, as the high cost of energy and basic goods consume people's disposable goods. Entry: I can't make it through the month, said Vula Paco, a nurse. Going through the end of the month means that your salary will last you until the last day of the month. For me, My salary is already spent after the first 10 days, she said. Greece's conservative government has spent more than €9 billion since September 2021 on energy subsidies and other measures to ease rising costs for farmers, households and businesses. He has promised to raise pensions next year for the first time since the country's financial crisis and further raise the minimum wage. They are giving us crumbs to keep our mouths shut, said Christina Skaluba, one of the protesters. But it's not going to happen, because we can't survive just with these measures. Gorillas closes in Italy. To layoffs. The fast e-commerce app Gorillas closes in Italy. After barely a year of activity, the company leaves the market and lays off its entire workforce, 540 people. The decision was leaked a few weeks ago, on the occasion of the news of the launch of its own private label in some foreign markets. Gorillas invests in 5 countries and closes in Italy. Gorillas decided to focus on Germany, where he was born in Berlin, France, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and the United States, New York. That is, the key markets from which most of the revenue is derived, 90%. In Italy, on the other hand, in the 5 cities of Milan, Rome, Turin, Bergamo and Florence, after the success achieved during the most serious phases of the pandemic, they takes note of the failure and packs his bags. Regarding our presence in Italy, we have carefully evaluated and are evaluating various strategic and financial alternatives, such as the sale of a company or the entry of new investors, the company explains. While reservations last, however, to date no negotiations have ended positively and there are currently no negotiations at a level of completion that would suggest a good outcome. For this reason, we have decided to start a gradual process of closing the business in Italy. We have already closed 3 of our stores in the cities of Milan, Rome and Bergamo, while the other stores in the country will close in the coming weeks. Until then, and while stocks last, we will continue to guarantee the home shopping service to our customers, Gorillas specifies in a press release dated the 4th of July 22. A dream that ended badly. All the Gorilla buttons, or riders, travel on electric bicycles, 0 emissions, and are hired with an ordinary employment contract. In Italy they cycled for a year, delivering food purchases in a matter of minutes. A perfect service for workers and customers, but economically unsustainable. This opens the way for workers to dismissal. This decision has important implications for our Italian team, which has already been informed of our plans for the market, and in respect of which we have initiated the procedures required by law and the collective agreements for union consultation, in preparation for the dismissal of the entire workforce. What is seen in this video is only a fraction of what really happens in the European Union and neighboring countries. It's time to start your network in Copaga Club. You only need to sell 4 Copaga packages and you can start with $25 United States dollars, and or $50 United States dollars and or 100 or all 3. Nothing more. Due to the seriousness of the situation, you have in your hands the easiest way that exists to generate the money that you lack today, and tomorrow you will no longer have possibilities. Visit www.copaga.club. You will see that there is no investment, since you receive the value of the package purchased plus an additional one as soon as you bring your 4 sales to the Copaga network. There is no risk and a great business that additionally offers more for those who work more. Today there are still options for VIP positions that can feed several families, one of them. Thank you.